Hello, everybody that's listening in. I'm Tony,
And I'm Casey.
and we are the founders of Anthony's Way, the Road to Kindness. And welcome to our podcast, The Way Forward, a Kindness Mission. And this is a special edition because today is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And we really want to make this special for you folks, especially because, and this edition is called Mom as Advocate. And we're going to add a little bit to that. We're going to say mom as advocate for their child with ADHD, right? Because our station is about helping with ADHD. Mm-hmm. And we want to welcome Casey Miller to join us today. Welcome, Casey. Nice to see you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
Casey.
Happy Mother's Day to all the moms.
That's right. And it is a special edition because I pushed for this edition.
I know he did.
I wanted to do this special edition because we've helped 36 families to date. And I can tell you that every one of those calls have been from a mom, and in many of those cases, as you know, they've asked us for help with the school system. So this is a critical point and a very important point. And we really didn't even know that education advocates even existed.
No,
because my Casey here, this one was the advocate for Anthony and for the kids. And so why don't you tell us your story, Casey, and share some of your background and just how you got into special education and what you do in your role. And Casey, we're excited because you're part of our advisory team, and you'll be working with the kids that we're bringing on here. We're bringing on 2 children that we're going to sponsor, start out, and we're excited to have you with us. So
yeah.
Please share your story.
Welcome.
Yes.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited about this topic as a mom, as a special educator, as an advocate for kids with disabilities. So it all kind of started when I finished my freshman year of college. I came home in Pennsylvania for the summer, and I needed a job. I decided I thought I might want to be a camp counselor, work with kids, and my dad, who refers me to pretty much everything, suggested I go check out this place called the Variety Club. So I applied, I went, I had an interview. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a camp for children with developmental disabilities. So it's a nonprofit organization that benefits children with disabilities throughout the Delaware Valley here in Pennsylvania. So I was hired as a camp counselor. I spent my summer working with kids with a variety of disabilities in that camp setting. I continued to work there for the next 10 years. And actually worked my way up to where in my last summer there, I was the director of the program. And I loved it. It was so much fun. My summers were amazing. And it really sparked a passion in me to work with kids with disabilities. I was going to school for psychology. And when I graduated, I decided, you know what, I'm going into special education. So I became a special education assistant in the public school system while I went back to school and got my master's and my teaching certificates. And ever since then, I've been a special education teacher in the public school system. And I found at first, I really wanted to do it because I wanted to give a voice to kids who didn't have one, who couldn't really stand up for themselves, who couldn't fight for their own rights, to be accepted, to be treated just with humanity. And that was really important to me. But in my role now as a teacher, I've found my goal is to help the kids and the parents have that voice, to empower them to have the confidence and the ability to speak up for themselves and fight for what they feel that their children need. So I'm very passionate about it. I love what I do. I love the families and kids that I get to work with.
That's awesome. That's great.
So as an education advocate, what do you do as an education? What is an education advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. An educational advocate can kind of fill a whole lot of different roles for families. Sometimes they might be associated with a lawyer's office if you feel you need to go that route. But a lot of times they are people who they themselves have gone through this with their own child, or maybe an educator like me who has experience in the school system. And it's really to serve as a knowledgeable and supportive resource for the family, helping them understand how their child's ADHD can affect them in the classroom, in their learning, in their behavior at school, and just giving clear information about the supports, the accommodations, and the legal protections that are available for our students who have ADHD. I have that really insider knowledge of the school system and how a classroom works and how a classroom operates, so I can help them navigate the processes in the school system, things like requesting an evaluation, interpreting the assessments their kids are taking, and really being a part of the team in their maybe 504 plan meeting, IEP meeting, and just be an extra collaborative member of the team to really make sure that that child's needs are being met and addressed in school.
Awesome.
So are you independent from, you're in the school system. Are you independent from school in that when you're helping? How does it work when you're part of the school system?
In my role as an educational advocate, I would be separate from the school system in that. I definitely, make sure the families that I'm helping, I'm not looking at a conflict of interest with anything, that I'm kind of being on the side of the family and I'm in a position to be able to do that. So I have, I've been on both sides of the table, and I try to kind of define those roles and keep them separate as best as I can.
That is so helpful. That is such insight. Thank you for doing that. So honestly, which parent do you think you work more with?
Definitely mom.
Yay, mom.
Mom is usually the primary contact. She's the one that the teacher is calling, the teacher is emailing. She's typically the one setting up meetings, participating in meetings. Often they do most of the talking in meetings that I'm in. Mom is usually the one that knows that IEP or knows that 504 inside and out. And they're the one that really take the lead from the family to do all of that.
Yeah.
It's good. So our moms not familiar with what the school can and can't do for the child.
I think some moms are and some aren't. I think the most important thing you can do if you do have a child with ADHD or any other neurodiversity is first gain as much knowledge as you can. Gain knowledge about ADHD. What's the research that's out there? What are best practices right now? And then learn about the legal protections. Learn about IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act to know what your legal protections are for your child. Additionally, if your child has an IEP and the school district offers you what's called procedural safeguards, those are your rights as a parent of a child with a disability. Read through those, read through and try to understand what exactly your rights are as a parent, what rights you have to be a part of the team, to be a collaborative member, and then just gaining understanding of what's the process for getting a 504 plan or requesting an evaluation and seeing if your child is eligible for special education. So really, knowledge is power when you're trying to advocate for your child.
So for those listening, why don't you explain, because people ask me all the time, and I wish I could explain it more, but I always say 504s are a little less than the IEPs, but why don't you explain it in the terms that parents will understand what a 504 is and why kids sometimes end up with a 504? Because Anthony had a 504 versus an IEP, an individual education plan, right? So why don't you, just so everybody's clear on what those two are.
Sure. So a 504 plan comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act and is for students who have a documented medical disability, has been diagnosed by a doctor, and it affects their ability to participate in school. So a lot of students with ADHD, we find they need certain accommodations in order to participate successfully in school. So usually in a school, the school counselor will take charge of the 504 plans and will sit with the parents and develop that and come up with accommodations that best meet that student's needs. But what it doesn't do is change the instruction that the student receives. They're still going to get the same curriculum and instruction as all other students in the school. In terms of an IEP, an individualized education plan, in order to receive an IEP, a student would have to go through what we call a multidisciplinary evaluation. So a school psychologist would give them some testing of their cognitive ability, their academic achievement. There might also be testing for things like speech language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. we can also use rating scales to look at students' social emotional well-being and whether that's an area where they're struggling. And if they're found to be eligible and in need of special education, we would then develop the IEP, and that's where they would get accommodations in the classroom, similar to what might be in a 504 plan. But then there would also be what we call specially designed instruction. And that student might receive some more intensive instruction. They might receive instruction in a special education classroom. They would have the support of a special education teacher, whereas with a 504 plan, the classroom teacher is really implementing all of those accommodations.
So how often is it that the classroom teacher really understands? Like, because I mean, you're sitting with what, 20 to 24 students, right?
Yeah.
So how would they know all of the, because I'm sure there's more than one or two that may have accommodation, right? So how can parents assure themselves that 504, what those accommodations or those requirements are going to be held up by the classroom teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first off, making sure that classroom teacher is a part of the 504 meeting. They're always included as part of an IEP meeting, but definitely with a 504, making sure that they're there, they're present, they're hearing what's being discussed. And then I think after that, having an open form of communication with your child's teacher, checking in, seeing how things are going, participating in conferences when those are offered by your child's teacher, and then reading through their report card or any things that come home from school. And if you start to see, they're really struggling in this area, but they're supposed to have, this accommodation that should help with that, checking in and saying like, hey, how often is this happening? How often are you offering them flexible seating? How often did they get extended time on that assignment? And really just knowing what's in it, and then knowing kind of the signs of what to look for that maybe it's not being followed, and you need to do some follow-up and make sure it's being implemented.
That's awesome.
So when I was Anthony's advocate, because we didn't know about educational advocates, every school year I think it was starting like in 6th grade, because until 6th grade, I was with him at school like almost every day because I volunteered at the school because I wanted to be there.
She wanted to make sure no issues would come up because
absolutely
Anthony's impulsiveness.
So anyway, once they got into 6th grade and they started having teams of teachers, and I always did try to keep a good relationship with the teacher. But at the beginning of each school year, I would write an email to those teachers once I knew who they were, just saying, hi, this is Anthony. This is, who he is, what he likes, what he doesn't like, and what are some things that you might be able to, some of the things that you might expect from him during the school year, and that I'm always here to help in any way that I can. Do you think that that's a good idea to do something like that?
I think it's a great idea. I think letting a teacher know right off the bat, what your child's needs are, they might be a little bit different than the other students in class, but that you're there to be a support and be a collaborator in your child's education is huge. I love hearing from parents. I love the parents that are there, that are active, they're involved, and they're really a collaborative member of the team. I really appreciate and respect parents when they take that active role. They don't just sit back and wait for the teacher to reach out and say there's a problem. They proactive. That's awesome.
And that's what I tried to do is we were progressive about it, and I would just say he's been diagnosed with ADHD and dysgraphia and learning disabilities and math and English. So instead of just waiting for the slammer to come down, and then we have a crisis on our hands.
Yeah, what was really important was that you let him know he had dysgraphia, so it was a little bit of a challenge for him to learn. But then, Casey, the other thing we did is we were seeing a psychiatrist at the time too, Dr. James Walker out of Palmyra, PA, and we got to thank Jamie because he would come with us to some of the sessions as there were some challenges, like Anthony had challenges in math, and we would bring him along just to be there to support, because he'd be the person listening to Anthony tell him about the challenges. And we always felt that it was a little better. Do you think that's a good idea if there's like a specialist there or someone that
an outside professional?
Is that a good idea too?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea for everyone that works with a child to be able to communicate and be a part of the team. Most school districts have a release form that you can sign as a parent, and it gives that school district permission to communicate with any outside providers that your child might be seeing. And again, it can get everybody on the same page, everybody using the same language or using the same strategies and really understanding the child as best you can to meet their needs. Yeah, I think that's fabulous.
So we have two questions for you. Number one is
no, we have actually more
we
than
have
that.
a few more, but give us a success story first about where this worked out really well, whether it was a 504, an IEP, family, and you were there to help the family, and you brought the value to the whole discussion and made sure the child, and you could see the child progressing and doing better because they were getting the help they needed.
Absolutely. So one student of mine comes to mind, and this was a student who was he was really struggling. He definitely had ADHD. He also had some, family factors that were going on, a lot of changes in his life. And he came to our school partway through the school year, in first grade, and we were just seeing some huge behaviors out of this child. He was a child that was throwing things in the classroom, being aggressive and just really, really struggling. And we as a school team we worked really hard first to build relationships with him, to really show him that school was a safe place for him where we were going to take care of him and help him as best we could. We put things in place like a soft landing first thing in the morning. So he came with me to my office first thing every morning before going to the classroom. He could eat his breakfast. We could kind of chat, see how he was feeling, see how the day had started, and really build from there. And so that was probably 2 or 3 years ago. And then by the time he was in, I think going from first to second grade, he had made huge gains where he was in the classroom for the majority of the day. He wasn't eloping and leaving the classroom. He wasn't destroying things in the hallway. He wasn't having these huge meltdowns throughout the day. And he was able to learn the coping strategies and the skills to be able to ask for a break and ask for what he needed. And so it was great to see him happy in school and glad to be there and not, fighting and trying to go home. So really, I think the foundation that we built was those relationships, one with him, with the student, but then also with his family, and showing the family, like, we're here for you. We brought the school social worker in so that they could get some help at home, really taking that team approach and the whole child approach, looking at everything a child needs, because their ADHD or their disability is going to affect them not just in school, it's going to affect them at home too. And so really trying to help them in all those environments was, I think, the best thing.
That's a great success story. That's great. Yeah, that's really powerful. So let me run this scenario by you. Okay. So now you have a situation that you have a similar child, but let's say that they're really struggling. They're not, and the teacher's not very helpful either. I mean, we know teachers are challenged because there's a lot of kids trying to balance it all out, but it's just not working. What do you do in the cases where it just might not work? They're not learning. They don't have the big behavioral issues, but they're just not learning. How do you help that child, and how do you help the whole environment?
Absolutely. Again, I think relationship building is kind of a priority. So teachers can sometimes be resistant to trying certain accommodations, trying certain changes. And I think they're unsure how that's going to work. Is it going to help the child? Is it going to mess with the other students? How's this all going to work? And so I really try to be understanding of that, and ask them to maybe just make one small change and do it for a few weeks. Just see what happens. And ideally, they'll see some progress and they'll see some change. And then they'll be more willing to do some more things and add some more things. A lot of it too comes down to mindset and trying to help people change their mindset. I think in the education system, sometimes we put the burden of making change on the student instead of trying to change the environment that they're in and provide those accommodations. So sometimes it's things like getting that teacher to just build a better rapport with the student. Hey, you know what? I'll cover your class for 10 minutes and you take them to the sensory room and see what they do in there and how they regulate themselves in there. Or just I don't know, hang out with them at recess for 10 minutes and get to know them outside of their being a learner, but what do they like? What's their passions? And I think if we can do those things, you start to get that mindset change that sometimes people need, and they're a little more willing to budge on, what they normally would do.
So what can be done if a teacher just is not cooperating at all? What happens then?
I think that's a situation in which, if as a parent, you've reached out to your child's teacher, you've talked about all of this, you've had those conversations, and I think it's important to go to the teacher first, have a conversation with them first, talk with them first. If they're really not budging, they will not give in. That's a time when it's appropriate to ask an administrator to join those conversations. Bring in the principal, bring in somebody who works maybe at the district office. If it's an IEP issue, you would bring in someone in special education. That's also a great time to look for an educational advocate. Find someone who can join you and really push for what your child needs. Unfortunately, sometimes there's times where you have to just tell a teacher, this is what has to be done. This is what's in the student's 504. This is what's in their IEP. Legally, you have an obligation to provide it. You don't want to get there. You want them to come around, but sometimes you kind of have to bring in those other team members to really, drive the message home.
So are teachers educated enough on the requirements of 504 and IEPs today?
I think
do they get any education on it?
We do. Teachers definitely do. It's something that we review, in professional developments. I know part of my role currently is trying to help teachers understand those things. So a lot of times teachers have a lot on their plate. They're busy.
Absolutely.
They're doing a lot. It's rare that I see a teacher who just doesn't want to do what's best for a kid. It's usually they see a barrier in some way to providing it for the child. So it's just breaking down barriers for the teachers. But again, I think constant education is needed. We always need refreshers. We always need to keep updated. I think giving teachers more research that's coming out regarding ADHD and what's best for kids is really important. I was lucky enough that I could participate in some professional development this year that was on that topic, which was really great. But again, like I said, knowledge is power. So really sharing as much information as we can with teachers is important.
Yeah, we did have an incident with Anthony in high school. In high school, he had one teacher that was totally resistant, and we had meetings. And so Anthony finally was transferred out to another class.
Okay. Yeah,
because it wasn't good for Anthony. It wasn't good. It just wasn't a good situation at all.
And I think for parents to know that it's not ideal. You don't want to take a student out of class, but in the end, sometimes those are the things that just need to be done to help that student be successful. So it's okay to push for that if you really feel like that's what's in your child's best interest.
Anthony wanted it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because at that time we had taught him to advocate for himself, the whole time we were teaching him to advocate for himself, because he knew I didn't do anything without talking to him first. And so he was at the point where he was advocating for himself at that time, and so I told him, just go in and try to talk to the teacher, and, then let's see what happens. So of course that didn't work. So then I contacted the teacher, and so then that didn't work. So then we had meetings after meetings, and the teacher was just like not doing it. So anyway, we got to move.
Yeah, which is really tough. I mean, because it just disrupts the whole segment. And most kids want to learn. I mean, most kids do want to learn. They want to try to understand what the subject is. Even though there are accommodations and all that good stuff, but they really, they're there, and some of it. So let me ask you this. So in your experience, let's say a child has ADHD and they're being bullied, what do you suggest that these kids do? Because I get that all the time. There's been parents that have called, and their child has been either suspended from school, and they're getting blamed for being the bullying, but somebody is bullying them, and they're standing up for themselves. What do you do in those cases? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of, one, having open communication with the school, like having those meetings to talk with everybody and try try and help them see both sides, because I think you're right. A lot of times our kids with ADHD who are a little more impulsive, who can't always regulate their emotions, they react more quickly. Yeah, when it comes to bullying, I think it's tricky. You're dealing with, he said, she said, trying to figure out what exactly happened, who said what. The child who kind of overreacts or uses their hands or uses certain words is the one that tends to be the one that gets in trouble. And sometimes the instigator or the bully, they fly under the radar and nobody, knows what they're doing. And I think just having those conversations, one with your child, to help them know what to do, how to stand up for themselves without using violence, without getting themselves in trouble, and figuring out when is it a problem they can handle on their own and when is it time to take it to an adult. I think that's really important for kids. There's what are problems you can solve yourself.
Hi.
And what are problems you need a teacher. Say hi.
Give your mommy a hug for Mother's Day coming up.
Yeah.
What are the best tips, best practices, best tips you can give to parents today? Just beginning to do this. Their child, they just get an evaluation, get the diagnosis. They know there's ADHD involved. There might be some learning challenges, because, and how do you, what are the best tips give them on how to work this through and present it to the school, present it in the best interest of the child, their child? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think first, again, learning as much as they can, have as much knowledge as you can going into it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Parents deserve to have a clear picture of what their students' school day looks like. What does their schedule look like? What does their instruction look like? Help me understand where they're struggling and what that looks like. So really having that clear communication with the school and trying to understand exactly what's going on. I think if you're at the stage where you are having a 504 meeting, having an IEP meeting, request a draft of that document before the meeting. Give yourself the chance to review it, to write down your questions, write down your concerns, so that when you go to the meeting, you're prepared for that collaborative conversation. I think it's really helpful when parents and teachers come in kind of on the same page versus the teacher saying, well, here's what we recommend. And it's the first time you're hearing it as a parent and you have to process it in that moment versus having had that time up ahead of time. It takes a lot of time. I'm sure, Casey, it takes a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort to advocate for your child.
A lot of tears.
Yeah, a lot of tears, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's absolutely worth it for your child. I think at the end of the day, give yourself grace and give some grace to the people that are working with your kid. They're generally not out to get them. They're not trying to make things harder for you. And if you have some patience and use kindness, you can get a whole lot further than if you really try to fight people.
Yeah.
What systemic changes do you believe are most needed to improve outcomes for students with ADHD?
So one of the big things that I am trying to see change in school is having teachers and schools take a universal design approach to learning and to education. Right now we have something called the Universal Design for Learning Framework, and it's a guide to provide access to all students to their learning. And really it's about giving choice and opportunity. So choices in where students sit, how they respond to a question, things like that. And there are ways that teachers can design their lessons, design their classrooms to make accommodations for everyone. So if one student in the class really benefits from a word bank on their worksheets, give it to everybody. It's going to help everybody. I think our school system, the way that it was not designed to meet the needs of kids with ADHD.
But you're seeing a lot more kids with ADHD than you've ever seen, right?
We're seeing so many more. And I think really thinking about your classroom and how you can set it up to remove the barriers for those kids is huge, is super important.
Yeah. So from a parent perspective, okay, and when parents come in, so you being the educator, now you're putting on your education advocate hat for parents that are calling, that we're working with. What's the first thing that you would do, just so parents understand, if they're going to work with Anthony's Way, the Road to Kindness, and you're going to be their advocate, what's the first things that you would do as you go about dealing with the parents?
Yeah. First, I would ask them just to tell me about their child. Tell me their strengths. Tell me what they're really great at, what they love, just who they are. Who is your child? Because they are far more than a diagnosis of ADHD. There's so much more to them than that. And then, what are their needs? What are they struggling with? What are the things that are really hard for them? What are the barriers that the parents see to their students' success? And then after that, after I've kind of gotten to know them, what they're struggling with, I would ask kind of what's their vision for their child, both in terms of education and in terms of, long-term life. Education should be preparing them for life afterwards. So what's their sort of vision or goal for that? And once we've kind of done that, then it would be the time to say, do they have a 504? Do they have an IEP? And start looking through the documentation that's in place and ways to improve that and work on that.
Great. Well, that's important for all the folks who we're going to be dealing with, because, it's helping the kids from 6 to 10, and then helping the teenage group, that have ADHD, they're typically going to have some kind of IEP or 504. So having you involved will be beneficial in helping them to weed through all of this stuff and being their partner. So every part of this is a partnership, and that's what we're trying to get across to everybody. So, we're great. We're blessed to have you on our team, and blessed to have you on our team. We're excited for what's coming and how we're going to go forward. So, we want to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day. And we want to thank you for taking the time to go through this, because as part of our team, you play a valuable role in making sure the family, the child, gets what they need. And I love the thought of finding out their strengths, because a lot of times it's what don't they do,
right?
And the kids have so much internal strength in them, and there's so many good things about children. Children are special, and it's really about helping them to find what their passions are, and that's what we're all.
Absolutely.
So is there anything that we didn't cover that you
wanted to share,
that you need to share?
I don't think so. I was just thinking and talking about kids' strengths. I think if you've got a teacher and you're struggling with them and they haven't connected with your child, maybe invite them to see your child in action with what their strength is. If they are someone who's great at sports or dance or anything, invite the teacher to come see them doing what they do well. And I think that will help to build some empathy from the teacher. And like I said, I think, a lot of this is focused on school and education, but advocacy for your child expands far beyond that, especially when they have a neurodiversity. So keep up all the good work, all the moms that are out there advocating for their kids. You're doing amazing work, and your kids are so lucky to have you doing that for them.
So moms, keep on advocating, and remember that we're here to help. Casey's here to help. We want to do what's right for the kids and for the children that we're working with.
That's right.
And
that's why we're doing this.
And happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great day.
You've given us some great information today, Casey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day. Give the kids a hug from us.
I will.
Okay.
All the best.
Right. Thank you to our listeners, our viewers today for joining us on today's podcast. And as we close out today's episode, let's please remember this. Kindness is powerful. And for those living with ADHD, it can be a lifeline. A kind word, a patient moment, or a gentle understanding can ease anxiety, boost confidence, and support mental wellness in ways we may never fully see. This May and every month, let's choose compassion and kindness for ourselves and for others.
That's beautiful.